bees. They may be fuzzy, stingy little jerks sometimes, but it turns out they're more important to our world than ruining picnics and attacking Nicolas Cage.
No, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
In fact, bees have a massive impact on our food, environment, economy, and culture. So much so, in fact, that we decided to do a whole video on what would happen if they disappeared. Spoilers, it's a lot! Welcome back to an alternate world, where we're talking about the bees, the bees, the bees! And what would happen if they were to suddenly vanish, if we would face our own extinction like some predict, and if we could replace them. Okay, so I know what you're asking. What's the deal with bees? And why are you doing a whole video on them? Well, it's because bees are vitally important to biodiversity and life as we know it on Earth. One of the most important roles that bees play in the world is that of our resident pollinators. While other animals, such as birds, bats, beetles, flies, and wasps all act as pollinators, with 20,000 species of them, bees are far and away the most important. Thousands of bee species have unique flight patterns and floral preferences, and many have co-evolved with flowers in such a way that their body sizes and behaviors almost perfectly complement the flowers they pollinate. On the flip side, many flowers evolve to be tailored around increasing their attractiveness to bees, who favor flowers that are in a color spectrum that they can see, which is ultraviolet rather than red-hued, and that release a strong, sweet smell when their pollen is ready to take. So, when you see a pretty flower, just know it's not thinking about you at all, it's trying to impress a bee. So, how do bees pollinate? Well, bees use the hairs on their body to carry large grains of pollen between plants. Ah, pollen, my mortal enemy and the bane of my existence every spring and summer. Curse you! Anyway, this successful transfer of pollen from plant to plant leads to fertilization, successful seed development, and fruit production. What do bees get out of this? Well, they are biologically driven to seek out pollen in order to feed themselves and their larvae, meaning that the whole process is a symbiotic relationship that benefits both parties. It's like giving someone a box of muffins to deliver to your friend down the street and letting them eat half. Everyone's a winner. Now, studies have shown that crops produce better yields when animals assist them in pollination, bees being the most dominant of these pollinators, with them reportedly visiting over 90% of the world's crops that require animal pollination. While typical starchy staples like rice, wheat, barley, and corn are wind-pollinated, meaning they don't need the assistance of bees, the likes of apples, avocados, blueberries, almonds, cucumbers, coffee, squash, tomatoes, watermelons, rapeseed, and even cotton all benefit from the help of bees. This means that roughly 1/3 of the food we eat requires bee pollination. In fact, it is reported that bees are responsible for $30 billion a year in crops, half of that from the US alone, which makes them 6 times more valuable than the average NFL team and 10 times more valuable than the Browns. In California, the cultivation of almonds alone is a huge business, with the state producing reportedly 80% of the world's almonds, with the industry worth an estimated $10.4 billion a year. To fertilize this total of 1.3 million acres of almond trees, honeybees are trucked to California from across the U.S. for the almond flowering season, with some reports even saying that 70% of commercial U.S. honeybees are taken to the state for this purpose alone. So, when you're carving a pumpkin, drinking almond milk, or taking a sip of coffee, think of the bees that helped bring them to you. I don't mean literally, obviously. You're not going to have a bee delivery driver, but you get the picture. Of course, bees are also responsible for creating beeswax. I mean, it's in the name, which is used in making candles as well as skincare products, sealant, and expressions telling people it's none of their business. They also create honey, which isn't just delicious and Winnie the Pooh's main food source, but also has medicinal purposes, with some saying it is an antioxidant and also has anti-inflammatory properties. Harvesting honey and beekeeping as a practice has been going on for thousands of years, with prehistoric humans keeping bees primarily for honey production for at least 10,000 years, with some saying it even predates the dawn of agriculture, which took place 12,000 years ago. These ancient humans historically used beeswax for waterproofing, fuel, and even nail polish. Beekeeping is still massively practiced today, with bees taken to farms across the world for pollination, as well as recreationally, with Red Hot Chili Peppers bassist Flea even owning his own apiary. Bees have also had a massive cultural significance over time. Ancient Egyptians saw bees as givers of life and resurrection, while the Romans and ancient Greeks saw beehives as the representation of the ideal society. One of the more outlandish traditions is that of telling the bees, where beekeepers would inform their winged family members of important events, such as weddings, births, and when people passed away. This is due to a superstition from Celtic times, where it was believed that not informing the bees of the news would cause ill fortune and bad luck. In fact, when Queen Elizabeth passed away, the royal beekeeper had to inform Her Majesty's bees of her passing and that Charles was now king. So, when you're at the park doom scrolling on your phone and reading a BuzzFeed article, make sure to share it with the local bees. I mean, it's in the name after all. So, flowers love them, they make fat stacks, are breakfast cereal mascots, they're friends with rock stars and perpetual gossips. But why is it then that bee numbers are dangerously in decline? Now, there are multiple reasons why bee numbers are dwindling, some natural and some due to human intervention. The main contributors to the demise of bees are loss of habitat, such as wildflower meadows, other insects eating their eggs, colony collapse disorder, where hives suddenly lose their adult members, global warming, parasites such as the crab-like varroa mite that feasts on their blood, diseases, and the vast use of pesticides and insecticides on crops. Air pollution is also thought to be affecting bees. Preliminary research shows that air pollutants interact with scent molecules released by plants, which bees need to locate food. The mixed signals interfere with the bees' ability to forage efficiently, making them slower and less effective at pollination. Numbers of bees are dropping at an unprecedented rate, with various species becoming endangered. And while we're not at a critical level yet, it's not looking good for the little guys, and it's not outside the realm of possibility that bees could someday go completely extinct. But what exactly would happen if all bees just disappeared tomorrow, where in some mysterious event, all bees were just zapped off the face of the earth? Well, there's a quote. If the bee disappeared off the face of the earth, man would only have 4 years left to live, which is sometimes attributed to Albert Einstein, although this is fiercely debated and there is no evidence to support this. But would the bee-apocalypse actually be that serious? In short, no, probably not, but it would certainly change the world we know, and in particular, the food we eat. Firstly, there would be a major ripple effect across our ecosystems. Without human intervention, plants that rely solely on bee pollination would soon die off, along with the animals that eat those plants to survive. Other plants would suffer as well, as their seed output would diminish and would ultimately have less reproductive success as they try to rely on less effective pollinators. Birds who eat bees as part of their main diet would also suffer, along with euphemisms, because the birds and the less effective pollinator just doesn't have the same ring to it. Secondly, human agriculture would take a massive hit. While some of the main sources of human caloric intake don't require insect pollination, like wheat and corn, many fruits and vegetables would be affected. All of those fruits and vegetables mentioned earlier, along with nuts, berries, seeds, and beans, including our beloved coffee, would not be able to be grown on such a large scale, causing the number of them to go down significantly. Within 3 months of bees disappearing, farmers would face record low yields. The amount of fruits and veg on supermarket shelves would halve, but their price point would skyrocket and become unaffordable to the average consumer. In fact, it's stated that blueberries and cherries rely on honeybees for 90% of their pollination, meaning blueberries would be the new caviar. Coffee may still exist, but a good cup of joe would be more valuable than liquid gold. Certain food industries would essentially crash. Many people would be put out of work. Farmers would have to quickly transition to solely wind-pollinating plants, and while it may not necessarily cause a mass famine, it would certainly lead to less options in your diet and the prospect of having corn 3 times a day, 7 days a week. Now, while plants can be hand-pollinated, this causes a labor problem, as people would have to be employed to engage in a less efficient and tedious method, which would also cause heavy expenses. When done by hand, using a brush to apply the pollen, a person can pollinate 5 to 10 trees a day, depending on the size of the trees. Tackling thousands of trees takes major manpower and a hefty budget. In fact, MIT graduates calculated that the cost of hand-pollinating a hectare of apples would be approximately $7,000. flower populations would almost certainly plummet, meaning we would have less variety, and it would also cause issues for florists, garden centers, and the bachelor producers in getting flowers. And, of course, honey would cease to exist, instead being replaced with a hodgepodge of other cheaper and less beneficial substances, such as corn syrup. So, if bees vanished, humans would still survive, but in a bleaker and much more bland world. I mean, who wants to share gossip with flies? But if the bees were to go, could we find a way of replacing them? Potentially. As mentioned, hand pollination is a possibility, although it is less effective, a lot more time-consuming, and expensive. Over time, evolution would find a new dominant pollinator to fill the tiny shoes left by the bees, but that would certainly not be overnight, and the existing pollinators would have nowhere near the amount of success as the bees. And that's where tech comes in. Currently, companies are using AI-powered devices, such as the Bloomex Crossbee and Rowbee, that assist in releasing pollen and use sensors to determine the optimal day for pollination. Other tech companies are looking into storing pollen without it deteriorating, using machinery to artificially collect pollen, and eventually to use it for pollination. Eijiro Miyako, a researcher at Japan's National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology, has designed what he believes could one day be a partial solution. An insect-sized drone capable of artificial pollination. Coated with a patch of horsehair bristles and an ionic liquid gel, these tiny robots can collect and transfer pollen from one plant to another. However, using these drones has caused skepticism from people. Not just because they watched Black Mirror, but because it is currently expensive to pollinate entire orchards or fields of time-sensitive flowers. On top of this, seeing as bees have adapted to different plants, different drones would be needed for these respective plants, meaning hundreds and thousands of years of evolution would need to be replicated almost instantly. This also means that we would essentially have to pick and choose what crops we keep and which ones we leave behind, as we would have to pick the easier crops to pollinate, meaning the harder ones would either go extinct or at least become incredibly rare, with only the passionate hobbyists and societal elite keeping these plants and fruit alive. So there you have it. A world without bees may not be cataclysmic, but it certainly won't be great. But what do you think? What would you miss the most if bees were to disappear? Do you think we'll ever replace bees fully? What do you want us to cover next? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.